We are live. Marshall, if I think about some of the muscles of leadership that I've built, particularly in this year and in the crisis that we face in these trying times, growing up as a leader, a lot of us have always focused on the outcomes first. We talked about the outcomes, and then we would begin a conversation with a deck and a spreadsheet and talk about how we got there. But what I've discovered this year that needs to go to the back, and we need to talk about people. We need to show care for people and to really ask how they're doing, get a pulse check, because it all begins with that. And I'd like to get your thoughts on this idea of empathy and caring for people and how that plays into the role of the leader.
Well, I've been studying a lot about the term empathy and the concept of empathy. And I think I've learned a lot in the past few months about this. I've been doing reading about it, trying to understand it. And now I realize that empathy has many positive qualities, yet empathy can also have negative qualities. So rather than talk about empathy in a kind of monolithic way, I'm going to talk about it in a more nuanced way. Talk about when it's great, when it's not so great, when it helps us, when it doesn't help us. Now, first, what do I mean by empathy? I'm going to put it quite simply. That's putting yourself in someone else's shoes, seeing the world from their perspective, understanding, feeling what it's like to be them. And I'm going to talk about empathy from four different dimensions, four different types of empathy. The first type of empathy I'm going to talk about is called the empathy of understanding. And what does that mean? I kind of understand where you're coming from. I understand why you're doing what you're doing. Now, on the surface, you might say, well, gee, that's very good. If you want to be a coach, you need to understand people. You need to know where they're coming from. Very positive. And it can be a very, very positive thing. Yet, why are advertisers effective? They understand why we do what we do, and they're able to manipulate us. Propaganda people, fantastic at this cognitive empathy. In other words, cognitive empathy for the empathy of understanding. Advertisers, propaganda, they understand this. People that do torture understand empathy. They understand what causes pain. They understand why we do what we do. So this can be a very positive gift. It can also be negative. How do you use this? The empathy of understanding, there's a book called Why Women Marry Psychopaths. And one reason is the psychopath is typically very good at the empathy of understanding. They know how to manipulate people. They don't have a guilt. They don't have a conscience. They understand how people work, and they can use this understanding to manipulate others. And also, too much understanding, we can excuse other people's bad behavior. I could say, well, yeah, Paul is doing that, but I really understand why. I know his background. And that could be an excuse to justify bad behavior. So the first type of empathy is, do you understand where the other person is coming from, but not just having empathy. How am I using this? I'll use myself as an example. Some of these types of empathy, I score higher or lower for myself. I score very high on this, and I have a gift. I'm sure you've seen this. I have the ability to see things in others they can't see in themselves. And I'm very good at that. I've been trained in that. I've had years of experience doing that. And that, as a coach, can be a very positive thing. It can help people look into a window that's different, a mirror that's different. It could be a parlor trick, though. It could be used just to manipulate people. So it can be positive. It can be negative. The second type of empathy, number one, is the empathy of understanding. Number two is the empathy of feeling. In other words, I can feel your pain. Some people literally can feel the pain of others. When you experience pain, I too experiencing your pain. I literally experiencing the sorrow with you. It's like contagious. In our mind, we have something called mirror neurons, and we all mirror other people's behavior. I learned this from my friend Martin Lindstrom. So when you smile, I'm more likely to smile. When you frown, I'm more likely to frown. When you laugh, I'm more likely to laugh. These are called mirror neurons, and they click in without us knowing it. Some of us, more than others, really feel other people's pain. You might say, well, isn't that a good thing? Well, yes and no. Perhaps yes. On the other hand, if you're going to be sad every time someone else is sad, you're going to be sad for a long time. And I notice many people actually have guilt about being happy. Why? Oh, why should I be happy when other people are miserable? Okay, then just kiss off being happy. You're never going to be happy. So the empathy of feeling can be a positive, it can be negative. Now, my friend Autant Slay-Gentil wrote a book called Align. She's writing a new book now called Unlocked. And in her book, she talks about empathy. And she says empathy is kind of joining with that other person. And she says it can be a good thing as a coach to join with that other person, but you have to back away. Because if you don't back away, you can't help that other person while you are that other person at the same time. So the empathy of feeling could be positive, could be negative. The third one, kind of compassion or caring, the empathy of caring, a little bit different. The empathy of feeling is I literally feel your pain. The empathy of caring is I don't feel your pain, yet I identify with you, I sympathize with you, and I'm sad because you're sad. I'm happy because you're happy. So your experiences, I care about you, and these caring moments, they give me empathy with you, the empathy of caring. You might say, well, that's a very positive thing. Compassion, yes, mostly. Yet on Friday, I'm working with the Children's Hospital in San Diego. One child probably dies there every day. I work with the CEO of the St. Jude's Hospital, a cancer hospital for children. Every day they watch children die. One of the biggest problems they have is burnout. Caring. Why can't the doctor operate on the family member? They care too much. They care too much. It blocks their objectivity. I had a fascinating study which totally blew my mind. I'm in a class with two of the greatest hedge fund managers in history. One guy is worth 3 times what the other guy's worth, and they're interviewing each other. So one guy is like a multi-billionaire, and the other's worth 3 times as much as he is. So he says to the poor guy, he says to the rich guy, why don't you have a fund? You could raise billions in 5 minutes. People love you. Why don't you have a fund? You know what he said? I started caring too much. I started caring too much. He said, when I was young, look, I have made billions and billions of dollars. Everyone knows that. What people don't talk about, I've lost billions and billions of dollars. I may have made 52% of everything I invested. That means I lost 48%. He said, when I was young, I didn't care. I didn't care. But as I've grown older, I feel like a boxer that gets hit in the side. It doesn't knock me out, but it adds up. It starts hurting. And I realized, I started thinking, these are people's retirement accounts. These are older people that are counting on me. And you know what he said? I became much less effective. I really couldn't take risks anymore. I actually became much less effective. And now I only invest my own money. Now, again, he's worth multiple billions of dollars. So if he loses money, he doesn't care anyway. It's only a game. He said, very interesting. So we talk about caring. We think about caring in a positive way. And obviously, it's got many good qualities to caring. Yet back to my friend Autant, you've got to back away. Because if we're not careful, that caring, like the surgeon operating on the relative, can block our objectivity and actually diminish our effectiveness. And the final type of empathy is the empathy of doing. And Paul, I've heard you talk about this a lot. You need help. I'm going to jump in and help you. Well, you think, God, it's great. You're really trying to help people. Could be great. But one of the things in your book you talk about is enabling. Well, when you have a little too much of this empathy of doing, you can create dependency. Right. You can create a situation where other people depend on you for the answers. You're not really enabling people. You're not growing people. So if we look at the concept of empathy, as you can see, my first thought is, gee, this is a totally positive concept, empathy. It sounds nice. Really get beneath that. The types of empathy, understanding or cognitive empathy. Do I understand where you're coming from? Feeling. Do I feel what you're feeling? Caring. Do I care about what's going on with you? And finally, doing. Am I doing something to act on this? Well, challenge yourself before you act. One of the nicest people I've ever met, she said, I'm a fixer. I've created dependency in my own family. I'm always fixing everyone's problems. Well, that empathy of doing is too hard. Now, one of the people in a group that I talk with every week is Telly Leon. Telly is a Broadway star. He actually played the role of Aladdin on Aladdin 1,000 times on Broadway. He's a great guy. He and I are working together on Friday with the hospital. And he talked to me a lot about empathy, and he gave me the best formula that I've ever heard for empathy. He said, empathy means being where you are now and relating to the people you're with now in a way that's the most positive for them. Being where you are now, dealing with the people where you are now, and relating in a way that is the most positive for them. So what that means is you go to a funeral, and then maybe in the next day as a CEO or the next hour, you have to go to a positive recognition ceremony. You've got to let go of the funeral. You've got to let go of the funeral and say, I'm not at the funeral anymore. I'm at this recognition. What do these people need from me? They don't need sorrow, they need joy. Don't carry it with you. And as my friend Altan said, you've got to take yourself out of that situation where you've been, put yourself into that situation where you are. And my friend Telly, playing the role of Aladdin on Broadway, he said in 90 minutes, I may have to change my emotional reaction 9 times. I'm in love, I'm out of love, I'm rejected, I'm accepted, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm funny. Well, he's got to constantly be focusing on his emotional reaction to fit the unique situation. Our life is like that. As a CEO, your life is like that. As we journey through life, breathing, starting over in each situation, having the discipline to let go of the past, let it go and say, I'm here now. And being who you need to be at that second in time to fit the needs of those people. And realizing when we think of empathy, whose needs am I taking care of? Whose needs am I taking care of? Is this empathy really about something for them? Or is this just selfish and focused on myself? A great way to challenge ourselves, and to me, a much more nuanced way to look at empathy and ask ourselves, how am I being the person that I can be to help the people I'm with? Final story. One of the people in my weekend group is a great athlete. And we discuss our week. And I said, how you doing with your wife? And he said, well, not so good. He said, she wanted me to spend a half hour with her. And then at the end of the half hour, she said I wasn't very present. But he said, oh, well, I was kind of tired. And, I said, well, that's interesting because I went to the National Basketball Association final game when you played. And, there was about 2 minutes left. And the coach, who was Phil Jackson at the time, coach of the Lakers, called timeout. And did you go to Phil Jackson and say, Phil, I'm tired? Yeah, I'm too tired here, Phil. I said, well, take me out, Phil. I'm too tired for that last 2 minutes. He said, no. And he said, how tired were you? He said, I was completely exhausted. Yeah, you're too tired to spend a half hour talking with your wife? Well, he said, good point. So finally, be where you are now. Think about this concept of empathy and ask yourself, what can I do to make the biggest positive difference? The biggest positive difference where I am now.
That's such a powerful, fresh perspective on empathy. Like you, I assumed it's kind of, it's a positive thing. We've been measured as leaders, by the way, on a competency, particularly in recent years, around empathy. Leader as empathetic, but it can also have a negative impact. It's also a burden. It can be a burden, and it can also, as you say, you become enabler in a negative way, the fixer, so to speak. So be in the moment. Great advice from Marshall. Hey, Marshall, thank you so much. A power-packed conversation. Always enjoy spending time with you. And I got lots of golden nuggets. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question for you. Let me be the coach for a moment to ask you the question. What's next for Marshall Goldsmith?
Well, one thing I've done is think a whole lot about legacy. And what am I going to do with the remaining part of my life? I'm 71 years old, and I'm going to answer that question by going a little bit back in history and then lead on to the future.